Hello and welcome to DawnNews English. You were both one of the first ones to kind of stress on the macro impact of floods, which is exactly what we will be discussing today. A third of the country is flooded, and because of the topography, most parts of Sindh and Balochistan will remain waterlogged. As per Sindh Chief Minister Ali Shah, it may take up to 4 to 6 months for the water to recede. And these are the two provinces that produce about 20% of the national wheat output. So my first question is, what happens if we're still waterlogged during Rabi season?
I think as far as Sindh is concerned, as you may have read, I highlighted this, I think probably in mid-August, that when these rains came, Pakistan obviously is very unfortunate we weren't prepared for it. But the biggest impact really of these floods this time is in Sindh. And the reason for that is that, Sindh is the drain of the entire country. So water from all parts of the country come to Sindh ultimately, whether it is KP, Balochistan, Punjab, northern areas, even India, so the flood water comes here. Secondly, the problem is that water that comes here doesn't go in the sea that easily, especially the water this time, which came from the sky, from the due to rains, which were very, very unusual, and climate change. But the problem is that we have never conceived of this, that what could happen if, 5 times of the normal rains comes in. And the worry is that a lot of that water will continue unless we do something about it. We were not prepared for it. And then our response in evacuating water, providing relief and rescue to the people, unfortunately, has been very, very poor. So obviously, with all that, the impact on economy is going to be huge because they're saying 30 million people displaced. Out of that, definitely 60-70% are in Sindh. So they are without employment. And then the agriculture land, half of it is still submerged. And more recently, on the left bank of Indus, we have seen that huge water has come from Balochistan and the northern Sindh districts into this lake, Mansoor Lake, and that has also flooded Tadu and few other areas. And the water is there 7 to 8 feet.
The Sindh government, along with the NDMA and the federal authorities that are working to help evacuate this water, effectively have no more than 30 to 40 days at best to drain this water and to ensure that the agricultural land and the farmland in Sindh is prepared for farming and farming of wheat in particular. The government of Sindh has announced a very, very high price for wheat, which is called the minimum support price, which is 4,000 rupees per mond, which is 80% higher than last year. Now that means that whatever land, agricultural land, is salvaged in Sindh in time for cultivation, or whichever areas of Sindh, at least the ones on the right bank of the Indus, which have been less affected by the floods, will definitely, in all likelihood, go towards cultivation of wheat. Now, the problem is that, yes, the price is attractive. Yes, farmers will hopefully move towards growing or cultivation of wheat. But if the water is not evacuated in time, and as the provincial government has already pointed out that it may not recede for the next 4, 5, 6 months even, and we also feel the challenge of salinity due to the overflooding of the LBOD, the left bank outfall drain. What that will happen is that even if 80% or 70% of area eventually goes towards cultivation, the yields will most definitely be affected. The yields will be affected on 3 accounts. One, a lot of farmers will not be able to sow the wheat in time, so they may go for late cultivation of wheat. 2, the waterlogging, and 3, the increased salinity in the lands. Now, historically, the productivity of wheat in Sindh has been almost 20-25% higher than in Punjab. And Sindh, as you pointed out, produces as much as 17 to 20% of total, along with Balochistan, total national output of wheat. And that means that one can very easily and on a very conservative side estimate that the national wheat output will be affected by as much as 1 to 2 million metric tons.
Pakistan at the moment is already in an economic crisis. We're still waiting for the IMF loan to come in. What you talked about, the humanitarian cost of the floods. Rehabilitation is also going to cost. The donations are coming in, but not as much as they did previously. There's also donation fatigue within Pakistan and amongst Pakistanis as well. So in that terms, do you think it is, how important is it for the government to start focusing on getting our economy back on track so that we are able to rehabilitate in a better way?
The estimate for 2010 flood losses were $10 billion. So if that was $10 billion, I think overall impact to the economy would be at least double of that. So if it is $20 billion, so you can imagine its impact will be, just not 1 year, but several years. Now, on the other side, Pakistan's economic condition remains very, very vulnerable. We remain, and this is 23rd IMF program, and it seems that we will continue in the IMF program for an indefinite period, one after the other, because I don't think we are able to sustain our current account deficits and debt servicing requirements without that. So how the government responds to this huge climate change disaster? I think it was good that Secretary General of UN also came, and he as well as many other representatives or leaders from the international community have recognized that this is a major climate change related disaster. And it is also recognized that Pakistan is not a major, it contributes less than 1% carbon emissions and environment. It is the rich nations who have caused global warming, and our glaciers are melting and the climate is changing. Ultimately, it is yet to be seen that how much support we will get from the international community. Now, I personally think that when this COVID-19 global crisis, obviously it was a global crisis, and Pakistan also suffered from it, but Pakistan relatively handled that well. You will recall that even IMF contributed $1.2 billion probably grant, and there was debt repayment delays by G20 countries of significant foreign currency amount. So this time, I think disaster to Pakistan is manifold bigger than the COVID-19 disaster. So it really depends how much Pakistan gets from the international community. I think if they are able to mobilize immediately, from $2 to $5 billion immediately, maybe I think, or at least commitments for rehabilitation, etc., then I think it will be easier to sustain, this disaster. Despite our economic problems, if you look at the budgets of federal government and the provincial governments, we have, they have planned 2.2 trillion rupees worth of development program. Federal government is 800 billion and remaining amount is from the provinces. So out of that, I think spending 400, 500 billion rupees to provide relief and also rehabilitation, will also not only alleviate suffering of these people, and of course, investing in dewatering. If we are, because you see what has happened is that not only we have not built any drainage systems in Sindh, but we have actually destroyed the previous irrigation drainage because there have been natural pathways, water flows, and there is a drainage division in the irrigation department. There are drains in many districts, but these drains have not been desilted for years. Their pathways have been blocked. They are full of silt, and they are encroached. And the construction that has happened over the years, we have actually blocked natural pathways of the water by building roads without culverts, and there is huge encroachment also, which we know of. People just go anywhere where there's empty land, and there are so many houses or small kacha houses near these drains and water pathways. So that is why the magnitude of disaster is bigger.
The estimated damage for our cotton crop is said to be between $508 million in Sindh only. This means that Pakistan may have to import cotton. So how much of a dent would that make to our import bill? And similarly, as we discussed earlier, we're already running a high trade deficit, and with global food shortage looming over our heads, do you think that the government should be thinking ahead and placing orders, whether it's cotton, whether it's food, seeing that the global inflation rates are expected to spike around December?
So Pakistan is already in the process of importing wheat, considering we had a shortfall in our national output already in the last season. And the federal government will continue to import wheat over the subsequent months. And as much as we might see a price spiral in the local grain market, I don't think we will see a significant shortage, because the magnitude and the severity of the crisis in front of us is well understood at all federal and provincial levels. So in my opinion, our problem is not so much as of the availability of grains, but A, of prices. B, more importantly, and I will absolutely agree with what Asad Saab had previously said, we also either already have some funding or financing available. We will have some financing available and funding available eventually. The international commitments, whether it was the earthquake of 2005 or the floods of 2010 or the pandemic, eventually trickle in. The question that is in front of us, and is probably extremely is at the risk of being ignored, is not the financial loss or the increase of trade deficit. Yes, the trade deficit, you asked about cotton, it will probably be impacted by another 750 million at maximum if we have to end up importing not just 1 million bales, but probably if you have to import as much as 2 million more bales. So in the past, we import as much as 4 million bales per annum just for your context. And in case of significant losses to the cotton crop in Sindh, we might have to import as much as another 1.5 million more.
Whenever there is displacement, there are also opportunities. I mean, for instance, if a government is able to mobilize funds, now this disaster clearly highlights the needs to rethink our entire drainage system of Sindh. And obviously, Sindh and Pakistan will not be able to, make this drainage system without support of the international community.
We in Sindh, at least, cannot afford to go back to the way things were done before the floods. The sheer number and the sheer percentage of Sindh's population, which is now at the mercy of recurrent freak weather events, means that these people cannot go back to living in the same structures and same houses and in the same flood-prone regions as they had before. Emphasize and re-emphasize to the government and to those in the corridors of power that things that the money will trickle in eventually, that more funds will mobilize eventually one way or the other. But what cannot be allowed is for life to continue the way it had before floods. We must and we have to add elements of sustainability in the way our housing, in the way our structures, in the way the markets, in the way the villages are designed, and in the way farming is also done in Sindh. And if, God forbid, we do go back to the way things were done before, we will see greater and greater, possibly greater and greater loss of life and more catastrophe in the years to come. Because, as Asad pointed out, we live in the most vulnerable region outside of the polar regions affected by the glacial melt due to climate change and global warming.
So it's important for us to have long-term policy to adapt to climate change. And like Asad said, that we need to direct our development funds towards rehabilitation. Unfortunately, it's been 3 months and we're still stuck at relief, and we're not even thinking about rehabilitation. And lastly, involve international community for drainage. We also talked about constructions along riverbeds. I mean, what happened in Sawar, the honeymoon lodge, that's the second time it's been washed away. So a lot of the destruction, the damages that we're seeing, we can't really blame nature because it's the man-made constructions that are in the way of nature. Thank you so much again.